This wasn't a war for glory. It was the largest, most brutal gold heist in human history. The Roman Empire was bleeding, its economy failing. North, across the Danube, sat a kingdom fabled to hold limitless gold. But this was not an easy target. Heresy-Worm. This is the complete century-long saga of how two worlds collided for a mountain of treasure. These conflicts, known as the Dacian Wars, were far more than simple border skirmishes. They were massive, full-scale military operations, with the most significant being fought between the Roman Empire, led by the calculating Emperor Trajan, and the formidable Balkan kingdom of Dacia, united under its fierce king, Decebalus. But the true casus belli, the spark that ignited this century-long inferno, was not honor or defense. It was a constant gnawing threat to the Roman province of Moesia, and more importantly, the empire's ever-growing need for resources. Rome, for all its power, was in economic distress. The vast military and civic machine required a constant infusion of gold, and the treasury was running thin. It was an open secret in the ancient world that the kingdom of Dacia possessed almost unbelievable quantities of gold. This resource, essential for the survival of an empire as vast as Rome's, glittered in the minds of senators and emperors, a solution to all their problems. So, when Emperor Nero began to circulate rumors that Dacia was an inexhaustible source of this gold, he was deliberately fanning the flames of military conflict, painting a target on the entire nation. Wherever the conflict between these two powers had been brewing for many, many years. Long before Trajan's time, clashes between Dacians and Romans were a common, bloody occurrence on the frontier. While the roots of this enmity ran deep, back to the very days of the Republic. From 82 to 40 BC, Dacia had reached its zenith under the rule of Burebista. He was not just a king, he was a brilliant military strategist, a unifier of tribes, and a shadow that loomed large over the Rome of Julius Caesar. Burebista's power was so great, his kingdom so threatening, that Caesar himself had drawn up plans for a full-scale invasion of Dacia. But fate intervened. Caesar was struck down in the Senate in 40 BC, and in a twist of history, Burebista was also the victim of an assassination plot in the very same year. Burebista's death was catastrophic for Dacia, leading to an atrocious division that splintered the country into warring factions. This weakness, however, did not mean peace. Years later, the first Roman emperor, Augustus, found himself in conflict with the scattered Dacian tribes after they refused to support him in his brutal civil war against Mark Antony. This refusal was a slight that Rome would not forget. By 29 BC, Augustus, now the undisputed master of Rome, dispatched expeditionary forces into Dacia. These forces were led by General Crassus Diebs, the grandson of the triumvir Marcus Licinius Crassus. The name Crassus was now linked not just to Parthian failure, but to Dacian punishment. The general's legions caused absolute havoc in the region, inflicting severe casualties and retiring several Dacian kings. Because of this campaign, and although Dacian raids into Pannonia and Moesia continued for years, the existential threat that Dacia posed had for a time been temporarily neutralized. A fragile, tense peace settled over the Danube frontier. For more than a century, an uneasy calm held. But in the brutal winter of 85 AD, that peace was shattered forever. The army of the Dacian king Duras surged across the frozen Danube, attacking the Roman region of Moesia. This was not a raid, it was an invasion. The attack was a devastating success, culminating in the death of the Roman governor, Appius Sabinus, who was also a legate and a Roman senator. The message was clear. Dacia was back, united and powerful. Someone of the Roman Empire was now ruled by Emperor Domitian, a man not known for his patience. He personally led several legions to the ravaged province, his objective to restore stability and reassert Roman sovereignty in the area. A year later, with the arrival of fresh legions under the command of the Praetorian prefect Cornelius Fuscus, everything was ready. This was to be the first great military interaction between the two fully mobilized forces. The Dacians, now under a new military leader, sent an emissary to Rome. Sworn, they offered the Roman emperor peace, a desperate bid to avoid what they knew could be their destruction. The proposal was, of course, rejected. Domitian wanted a victory, and Fuscus wanted glory. With little delay, Cornelius Fuscus, at the head of his legions, crossed the Danube River into the Dacian heartland. But the barbarians had not been idle. Baksar, they knew their land. Yoder, they knew its strengths. As the Roman forces marched deeper, following a path into inhospitable lands, the trap was sprung. The Roman column, confident and overextended, suddenly found itself ambushed from all sides. The Dacians, led by their brilliant general Diorpanius, materialized from the forest and high ground. It was an act that chillingly recalled the disaster of Teutoburg. The Roman legions, caught in the pass, had no room to maneuver. Their discipline, their formations, their very strength became useless. The battle, if it could be called that, was a massacre. The legions were completely crushed. They were overwhelmed. The Roman standard, the sacred eagle, was lost. And with his army, Cornelius Fuscus himself estirò la pada, his ambition ending in the Dacian mud. This catastrophic ambush was named the First Battle of Tapai. In the aftermath, the victorious Dacian general Diorpanius was given a new name by his adoring soldiers and people, Decebalus, a word meaning brave in the Dacian tongue. He was immediately elected king of all the Dacians, finally reuniting all the tribes under one powerful, battle-proven leader. Decebalus was now the undisputed master of Dacia, and the man who had handed Rome its most humiliating defeat in a generation. Despite this staggering blow, the Roman war machine did not simply grind to a halt. The loss of an army and a prefect was infuriating, not paralyzing. This time the legions were commanded by Lucius Tedius Julianus, a far more cautious and methodical general. However, Julianus led his army back to the very place of the disaster. There, at the Second Battle of Tapai, he met the forces of Decebalus, and using superior Roman discipline and tactics, won a hard-fought victory against the Dacians. Following this devastating contest, King Decebalus, ever the pragmatist, conducted a tactical retreat. But he was also a master of psychological warfare. As his forces pulled back, he supposedly had the surrounding forest decorated with hundreds of suits of armor placed among the trees, making it appear as if a massive army was still present and ready to fight. The trick worked. Julianus, fearing another ambush and not wanting to risk his victory, believed the deception and halted his advance. Tumont, Decebalus, now the leader of the 4 tribes he had united, and having seen both a great victory and a great defeat, played his next card. He sent another request for peace. This time, the Roman Empire accepted the cessation of hostilities. Domitian's hand was forced, not by Decebalus, but by instability elsewhere in the empire. In Germania, a Roman general named Lucius Antonius Saturninus had rebelled against the emperor, creating a dangerous conflict within Rome's own borders. Domitian needed the legions from the Dacian front to deal with this internal threat. The truth is that the resulting agreement was deeply unfavorable to the Roman Empire. It was a humiliation, but one Rome had to swallow. Decebalus officially converted Dacia into a client state of Rome in exchange for being formally recognized as its king. But this was just the public face of the deal. In reality, the client king Decebalus received a substantial sum of money and, more importantly, Roman resources, engineers, and artisans. The official purpose of this aid was for Decebalus to defend the empire's border from other, more hostile tribes. Instead, the Dacians, under their clever king, used that Roman money and Roman expertise to upgrade their own defenses, building formidable new fortresses in the mountains. They were, in effect, using Rome's gold to prepare for the next war against Rome. Despite an appearance of diplomatic cooperation, the tensions between the two powers were worse than ever. This uneasy poison peace festered for years. At this point, Rome found itself in serious economic trouble.
Starving. Please help us.
The years of costly military campaigns, coupled with the internal instability and a persistent lack of gold in the economy, had pushed the empire to a breaking point.
Dacia.
It was in this desperate atmosphere that the rumors, first started under Nero, were deliberately spread again. Dacia was a land of gold, an inexhaustible fountain of wealth. Adoron, the propaganda machine, lit the fire for the next military conflict. Of course, the gold was not the only reason, merely the most pressing one. There were other perfectly valid strategic motivations to pass to the sword. Roman intelligence estimated that Dacia, under the unifying leadership of Decebalus, could field some 250,000 well-armed men. This was a staggering number, an army more than large enough to invade and overrun Roman provinces like Moesia or Pannonia at will. Already, this was not a theoretical threat, it was a memory. The ghost of Appius Sabinus and the ashes of Moesia were still fresh. In addition to this, Decebalus had been busy with diplomacy. The Dacians had forged alliances with several of their neighbors, tribes that, in the eyes of the Romans, were openly hostile. A united bloc of barbarian nations, led by a king who had already outsmarted and defeated them, was a nightmare scenario for Rome. Finally, there was the core tenet of Roman foreign policy. The defensive policy of Rome was, paradoxically, to avoid a defensive war at all costs. The best defense was a preemptive, overwhelming offense. Schon, one did not wait for the wolf to jump the fence. One went into the forest and hunted the wolf, its cubs, and its entire pack. For all these reasons, the gold, the army, the alliances, and the policy, the new Roman emperor, Trajan, began his preparations for a war on a scale not seen in generations. He and Trajan was not Domitian. He was a magnificent military man, a soldier who understood logistics, strategy, and most of all, the will to see a fight to its absolute conclusion. This was not to be a punitive expedition. This was to be a war of annihilation. Such was the priority Trajan gave to this campaign that he made a decision that left his generals breathless. He stripped other frontiers of their legions, pulling veteran cohorts from Germania, from Syria, from Britain, leaving these borders dangerously exposed, all to gather them for the decisive push into Dacia. Finally, in the year 101 AD, after securing the full backing and blessing of the Senate, Trajan prepared his legions to advance into Dacia. The emperor himself, clad in his general's armor, would lead them. Kern, the Roman offensive was a masterpiece of strategic planning. It was headed by 3 separate columns of legions, a massive 3-pronged trident designed to march directly to the heart of Dacia. Yes, they did not march with subtlety. They advanced by burning towns and villages as they went, the smoke from their fires acting as a vast climbing signal, a message of overwhelming power and ruthless intent intended for Decebalus. This was not just war, it was terror. Trajan, in a move of profound symbolic power, led his column to the very pass where Cornelius Fuscus had been crushed. He sought out the Dacian army in that same valley of humiliation. But Decebalus was not yet broken. Still in 101 AD, in a desperate bid to halt the relentless Roman advance, the Dacian king gathered his remaining forces and, with his allies, the fierce Roxolani horsemen, launched a daring counterattack. He struck at the Roman columns near the city that would later be known as Nicopolis. Just so this clash gave way to the Battle of Adamclisi. Trajan obtained a great crushing victory. In fact, the victory was so total and so significant that the city was named Nicopolis, the city of victory, in its honor. Sueku, after this devastating defeat, with his armies shattered and the Roman legions marching unopposed through his kingdom, Decebalus had no options left. He was forced to colgar los tenis. His only remaining choice was to beg for peace. Trajan, being a pragmatist, accepted the surrender, but his terms were severe. Trajan, being a pragmatist, accepted the surrender, but his terms were severe. Decebalus was forced to become a Roman vassal, a true one this time. Rome now had a boot on Dacia's neck. The Dacian king for a time complied with Rome's terms. He was a broken man, or so it seemed. He watched as Roman legionaries patrolled his streets and Roman engineers mapped his lands.
Keep moving.
But the pride of a king like Decebalus was not so easily extinguished. The humiliation festered. Soon, in secret, he began to incite the tribes to rebel against the Roman occupiers. He sent messages to his old allies. He started launching small, clandestine attacks on Roman territory, testing the limits, trying to reignite the fire of resistance. The news of this treachery traveled quickly to Rome. Edwin, when Trajan learned of this betrayal, his reaction was not one of rage, but of cold, final resolution. He had given his enemy a chance at peace, and that enemy had spat on it. At Coronation, there would be no third chances. Trajan immediately began preparations for a second massive war. This time, the objective was not surrender. It was extinction. As the Romans gathered their strength, the barbarians on the frontier, emboldened by Decibulus's call to arms, launched constant, vicious raids that decimated the Roman troops stationed in the area. They were small, sharp saludos that kept the border bleeding. But these were just the last desperate gasps of a dying kingdom. Finally, in the summer of 106 AD, Trajan's legions were ready for the final invasion. The scale of this army was unlike anything Dacia had ever seen. This time, the advance was even more methodical, even more brutal. The Romans advanced in 3 enormous blocks. One, under the personal command of the emperor himself, made a direct line for the Dacian capital, Sarmizegetusa, with the intent to besiege it. Aphrodituri, the capital, despite its new Roman-funded fortifications, soon fell to Trajan's siege engines and the relentless assault of his legions. The heart of Dacia was now a smoking ruin. Waira but Decibulus, the king, the symbol of resistance, managed to escape the inferno. At this point, the war's primary objective shifted. It was no longer about conquering territory, it was a manhunt for the king. Roman cavalry patrols scoured the countryside, their orders to bring him back, alive or dead. Decibulus, with a few loyal retainers, fled into the mountains. He was hunted, his allies gone, his kingdom in ashes. Soon, a Roman patrol closed in. The king, seeing that escape was unviable and capture was imminent, made his final choice. He would not be paraded through Rome in chains. He would not give Trajan the satisfaction. Before the Roman soldiers could reach him, Decibulus the brave, El Rey Dacia, took his own life. Shakatur, the war between the Dacians and the Romans, was at last finished.
He's dead!
With the death of its king and the destruction of its capital, Dacia as a nation ceased to exist. It was formally annexed and became a Roman province. And then, the final accounting began. The rumors that had driven the empire to war, the whispers of inexhaustible gold, were put to the test. They turned out to be true. Not only were they true, they were an understatement. When Trajan's treasurers finished their work, The empire had secured a war booty of more than 100 tons of pure gold and 300 tons of silver. Sierra, this was a sum so vast it is almost impossible to comprehend. This haul, of course, did not even count the most valuable prize, the rich Dacian mines themselves, which now passed into the hands of the empire, ensuring a steady flow of wealth for decades. Nor did it count the thousands upon thousands of Dacian survivors who were rounded up and taken as slaves, a vast new source of labor to fuel the Roman machine. Trajan, for this incredible victory, this permanent solution to the Dacian problem, and the salvation of the Roman economy, passed into history. He was celebrated as one of the very best emperors Rome ever had, his name synonymous with conquest and triumph. The conquest of Dacia, paid for with so much Roman and Dacian blood, is considered by many historians to be the last great conquest of the Roman Empire, the final spectacular expansion before its long, inevitable decline. The treasure from Dacia funded the high water mark of the empire, building the forum and the column that would bear Trajan's name, a permanent monument in stone, spiraling to the sky, telling the story of the war that was, in truth, the greatest heist of all. The story of Burebista, the first great unifier, became a distant legend. A tale told by grandfathers about a time when Dacia was a true apex power, a threat to the mighty Julius Caesar himself. His reign from 82 to 40 BC was a fleeting glimpse of national greatness, a time when a great strategist had forged an empire in the Balkans that Rome itself had to respect. His plans and Caesar's to invade each other became one of history's great what-ifs. For one, their simultaneous deaths, both victims of plots in the same year, felt like a dark cosmic joke, a signal that the age of giants was over. The atrocious division that followed Burebista's fall was the wound that ultimately never healed. It was the weakness that Rome, generations later, would so skillfully exploit. The campaigns of Augustus, which seemed so minor at the time, were the first probes, the first time Rome had tested the fractured kingdom's defenses. The refusal to aid Augustus against Antony was a matter of pride for the Dacian tribes, but it was a fatal error in diplomacy. It put them on Rome's permanent list of enemies. When Crassus dives Dabun Saludo in 29 BC, he was not just on a punitive expedition. He was setting a precedent. He was teaching the Dacians that Roman memory was long and its reach was inescapable. The Astragos he caused, the kings he retired, were a down payment on the war to come. Whence the century of relative peace that followed was a lie, it was not peace, it was a long, slow inhalation before the scream. The border raids in Pannonia and Moesia were the symptoms of a deeper sickness. Dacia had not been tamed, only temporarily quieted. The winter of 85 AD was the end of that illusion. When King Darius sent his army across the ice, he was rolling the dice on Rome's perceived weakness. The death of Appius Sabinus was a massive strategic gamble, a declaration that Dacia was no longer a fractured land of tribes, but a kingdom reborn. Domitian, for all his flaws, understood the gravity of this. His arrival with the legions was not just to stabilize a province, it was to answer a challenge to imperial authority. Planning for the counterattack was meticulous, a sign that Rome was taking this threat seriously. Cornelius Fuscus, arriving with the Praetorian Guard, represented the emperor's full, arrogant might.